Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on Harbourtime Strategy Talks podcast. I'm your host, Colin Harbor, and today is October the 23rd. Wow, what an exciting year. It has been a life-changing for many, including me. I started out the year much different than I'm going to end it, but today is today. And today is the day I wanted to go over a few things that I learned during the first season of podcasting. If you're like me, you might be getting a little bit sick and tired of all the politics, but I was thinking about it today. It's something worth putting up with. We live in a country, at least if you're in the United States. I know I do have some listeners outside of the United States. But we live in a country where we can make changes every few years or keep them going the same if we like the direction. So I am glad that we go through this cycle and glad to be here today. So I want to spend a few minutes today, like I said, recapping season 1 of Harbourtime Strategy Talks podcast. And then I'm going to go into the lessons that I learned in my first season. Let me say this. I had some great guests this year on the podcast, or this first season on the podcast. I didn't really know how that would go. I thought actually the podcast would just be me all along, but I learned relatively quickly that I think by adding guests, I could add value and add content. So I want to say thank you to each of the guests, Justin Rand of Rand Consulting, Chris Baggett of Canyon Creek Lodging, Jamie Shibley of The Expressory, John Davis of Big Token. I'll say John Davis is one of my old friends from junior high and high school, so it was great having him on the show. Lana Lawhorn, who I actually went to MBA school with, and it was great reconnecting with her. And then the non-related, another Harbor, Mike Harbor of Harbor Resources Leadership Consulting. Thank you. You all helped make season 1 a success, and I'm glad that each of you is on the show. Hopefully it was useful for you and useful for the listeners to have you on the show and to add value and add content. So let's talk a little bit about the lessons learned in season 1. So I want to start out by talking a little bit about the podcast industry. And I'm going to read a definition. Most of you know by now, but podcasting is, and this is a quote, a digital audio file made available on the internet for downloading to a computer or mobile device, typically available as a series, new installments of which can be received by subscribers automatically. So essentially, podcasts and podcasting technology have made it possible for anyone to produce a show about any topic for listeners and subscribers. Podcasting is a great means to promote and to learn, and I found that out during the 3 months of my first season. It's also a great means of entertainment. I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of different types of podcasts, spiritual podcasts, business podcasts, motivational podcasts. So you can take a lot in from them, but there's also storytelling podcasts. There really are a lot of great shows out there, and I encourage you to listen to them. According to podcastinsights.com, they had some statistics on there, and there are currently over 1.5 million podcasts with over 34 million episodes available. So that is a lot of content. I guarantee you, if you went out and searched podcasts, you would find something that interests you that you want to listen to. Additionally, recent data shows that 75%, 212 million of Americans are quote-unquote familiar with podcasts, and 55% of Americans have listened to at least one podcast, which is up, by the way, 40% since 2017. So keep in mind that the above statistics are for, at least the statistics I just gave are for the United States only, but the evidence is clear. A whole lot of people listen to podcasts. podcasts. All of these listeners can also convert into revenue. According to a PwC study recently, advertising revenue for podcasts will be a little over $800 million in 2020. The industry has actually slowed a little bit in 2020, which I was a little bit surprised at, but this number will more than double by 2024. So $1.6 billion in ad revenue for podcasts by 2024. My venture into podcasting, really actually without any of this data in hand, I decided it was time to jump into podcasting. And first I started a podcast for a hobby of mine, a DFW top loader. It's a sports card and non-sports card and other memorabilia hobby show. And I did that for a while and found out that was a little bit demanding and had to focus on business. So that's when I decided to, by the way, I'm going to go back to DFW top loader hopefully soon and start producing that show again. But I decided to start a second podcast that focused on business strategy for small and mid-sized businesses. But I think also the content can be consumed by anybody who's in business or any type of strategy. So I decided to give it one quarter, July, August, and September. And I asked myself, how difficult could it possibly be to put together a podcast? At the time, I didn't know how many there were, but I knew there were thousands of podcasts, and most of the ones that I've listened to at least are very good and provide a lot of information. As I mentioned, they cover a variety of topics, and business strategy is just as good as any. So the lessons I learned really after I kicked off my podcast are pretty significant. And I think if you are considering starting a podcast or a YouTube channel or anything where you're going to put out content, I think some of these lessons can be valuable. Number one is that a podcasting tool is a necessity. So you need to have some sort of podcasting tool. Of course, you need to have a topic, but let's say after you get past the topic, you need to have a tool to record and produce your show. I searched around a little bit and became familiar with a company called Anchor. That's anchor.fm, anchor.fm. It's extremely easy to use. In fact, you could probably go out there right now and have a podcast up and running within the next 30 minutes if you wanted to. There are many other tools out there. I'm sure they're all equally useful. Personally, I like Anchor, and that's what I chose, and that's what I'm going to stick with, at least for now. By the way, they provide you analytics on who's listening, when they're listening, what country they're in, what devices they're listening from, and another of other things. So that's why a tool is essential. The second thing, and really this could kind of recap it, but I'll say number two, is that podcasting is hard work. While setting it up is relatively easy, like I just said, developing meaningful content takes significant effort. By any measure, I consider myself a professional talker. I talk all the time. I talk for business. I spend a lot of time networking and developing business. I'm not a professional speaker, but I'm definitely a professional talker. In theory, it should be just as easy to develop content as it was to set up my podcast. That is to say, you got to have something to talk about. How difficult could it be to come up with an outline? As a side note, my dad was a pastor, a preacher for years, and he spoke every week, multiple times per week, and he put it together. So I thought it was just going to be easy. Wrong. I learned how difficult it was to put it together. The ability to speak into a microphone like I'm doing right now for 15 minutes with no audience. Of course, I had guests on some of the shows, but when I started, I didn't. It was more difficult than it sounded. So you've got to identify a topic. You've got to develop it. Quite a lot of time should be spent developing the topic. I must say I didn't spend as much time as I probably should have on the content, but I know for season 2 I'm going to spend at least 10 hours per topic. And quite frankly, that might not even be enough. I know several of the podcast hosts and producers spend weeks preparing episodes. Maybe not all at once, maybe it's staggered in, but I felt a little bit unprepared either when I was doing the show by myself, but when I had guests too, because I don't think I spent enough time. So make sure it's hard work, and make sure you need to spend, I'd say, at least 10 hours, if not more, preparing for each episode. Number 3 is that additional tools are key. So for instance, I had to get a microphone, the one that I have right here. I found it on Amazon, and I actually had some award points, so I didn't have to pay for it. And the videos that I started to produce were recorded with a computer. I actually had to get a new computer. I did some stuff on my iPhone, but also had to get a new computer because it just wasn't working for what I needed. I also need a stand, which I have on my phone right now. I'm actually recording 2 videos, one on the phone as well as one on my computer. So I had to get another a phone stand from Amazon. The one I got wasn't all that great, but luckily I had a friend, actually one of my hosts or one of my guests, Justin Rand, had an extra stand that he had received through a group that he's associated with, and he provided that to me. So that was great. But back to the computer, I had to get a new computer. It's easy to edit videos through iMovie, and I think that's a great tool, but I wanted to use a different tool, and quite frankly, the computer I had just didn't have enough power to work with that tool. So I ended up getting a new computer to do that. So, you need to make sure you have the right tools to record the podcast and video if you're going to do it. Number 4, atmosphere matters. And this is what I mean by that. I'm right now in my home office. It's a great home office. I love it. However, the acoustics are really bad. So there's a lot of echo from the hardwood floor up to the ceiling and back. So I tried multiple locations in my house. I've even recorded stuff in the closet so that there's really just no echo whatsoever. I've ended up back here in the office, and I've actually put some stuff down on the floors. I'm probably going to end up getting some panels to put up, temporary panels that you can use for sound. But it's important to make sure you have a good acoustic setup. Also, when I was moving around the house in different rooms, the lighting was off. So luckily, Justin Rand, who I mentioned a minute ago on the stand, also provided me with some additional lighting that he received. The battery's actually out on it now, so I don't have it on. But the atmosphere is key from a sound standpoint as well as the video. I'm actually probably going to end up upgrading my microphone and then some sound tools to use to edit as I move forward. But it became real apparent to me when I interviewed a few of my guests. Not that the others didn't have great sound, but Lana Lawhorn Fanny Dunnigan. Lana, you had great sound too, but Fanny Dunnigan had great sound. Now, she produces videos and content all the time, but then Mike Harbour, my last guest, he had incredible sound, and so the contrast between my sound and his sound was different. You have to have the right distance between your mouth and the microphone, and a lot of times I get a little bit dynamic, for lack of a better word, when I'm talking, so I need to work on the sound setup, but you got to have the right acoustics when you do a podcast. Number 5, my 5th tip is add video when possible. Along the way, somewhere I decided to start recording the shows, and again, I talked about the computer and the editing, but I decided to start recording the shows to put it out to put the content out on YouTube, also to add it to my website and to provide it through LinkedIn and LinkedIn Stories. There's just so many ways to get the content out that you need to, if possible, use multiple tools. So video, recording, sound, and push it out as many places as you can. I use Zoom on my calls. I know there are other tools. Again, I just like Zoom. I'm comfortable with it. I'm familiar with it. So to edit things, I use Adobe Spark and Adobe Premiere Rush. It just helps me get some added flair, if you will, to the videos. So I just suggest that you add video if you can. It's very easy. Again, if I can do it, anybody can do it. To start recording yourself, edit a video a little bit, and push it out through YouTube or leak it to your website if you have it. Number 6, bandwidth is important. So I'm right here in the middle of Dallas, North Dallas, Texas, USA, one of the biggest cities in the state, definitely, and even one of the biggest cities in the country. But my bandwidth gets eaten up here very quickly. My wife works from home. I work from home. The kids were homeschooling at the time due to the quarantine and the COVID pandemic. So a lot of times things were glitchy in my videos going through Zoom, so the connection wasn't all that great, and you just have to use your editing tools to push through that. But make sure you've got the right bandwidth wherever you're recording from, whether it's your home or an office or something like that. So number 7, podcasts can actually produce revenue. I made a little bit of revenue off my podcast this season, not a whole lot, but Anchor actually matches you with sponsors that you have a choice of selecting to put into your show. My sponsor most of this season was Anchor itself, which they do a sponsorship. And like I said, it wasn't a whole lot of revenue, but it was interesting seeing the money come in. You can also set up a recurring payment. I know a number of podcasts actually ask their listeners for monthly donations, $5, $10, $20. Or a one-time donation. It helps keep the podcast going. It helps the content grow. But more than anything, you need to think about it as a revenue generator. What can you do with your content to actually generate revenue? And I know you can, and it's interesting to look into. The final thing I learned in season 1 is that you must provide value. Like I said, I listened to a number of podcasts. One of them is Gary Vee. He's got numerous podcasts that he puts out. And back in March and April, he's talking about you got to provide content. Value. You've got to add value. And I really didn't fully understand what that meant until I started talking and recording. You can't just talk about things that are interesting to you. Maybe you can, but people are not going to listen. They're not going to subscribe. They're not going to recommend to others to listen to your content unless you're adding value. So obviously strategy is a broad topic for business, but I really wanted to focus on that and bring guests that had niches within their market and experience that could add value to my consumers or my listeners. So keep in mind that you must provide value. So that's it. Those are the main things that I learned in my first season of podcasting. I really enjoy it. Like I said, I've got a hobby podcast that I do, and I've got another concept that I'm going to develop. If there was just a little bit more time, I'd get all of these going. Right now, I'm really going to focus in on Harbourtime Strategy Talks as my podcast channel, and really am looking to provide some great content in season 2. So I enjoyed it. Like I said, I expected that it would be challenging, but it was more so than I anticipated. So let me know if I can be of assistance to you. If you have questions about a podcast, I actually had a friend in my industry call me this week and asking about LinkedIn stories. So I use a lot of these different things to push out content and to push out business information. So if you want to talk about podcasting or videos on YouTube, how to set them up, what tools to use, what microphones that I've heard are better, how to set up a studio, I'm available to discuss this with you anytime. You can shoot me a message through LinkedIn, or you can send me an email at Collin, COLLIN, at collinharbour.com. That's COLLINHARBOUR.com. And I'd be happy to connect with you. I have a link to a calendar. We can schedule some time out there. And by the way, go visit collinharbour.com. I do have a link to a lot of my videos, and the podcasts are available, as well as some additional written content that I think will be useful for businesses. So thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you for watching the podcast if you're doing so. Look forward to season 2. I haven't picked a date yet. I'm working on an outline of topics I'd like to cover and how I'd like to roll that out. So I'll be announcing that pretty soon. But thank you for listening, and I will talk to you soon.